Thank you, Madam President. You know, we're today here debating the issue of rules, and I've listened to this debate about the Senate rules, and the word broken gets tossed around a lot. Broken agreements, breaking the rules to change the rules, those are the sideline comments. And they miss the real point, because what is broken is the Senate itself. I've said for a long time, the Senate is a graveyard for good ideas. And the shovel is unprecedented abuse of filibusters, of delay and obstruction. It all adds up to one thing: broken. We called for changes in the Senate rules at the beginning of this Congress. We should have put in place a talking filibuster and other changes, but we didn't. So we have this tyranny of the minority, where the minority governs, just the situation that our founding fathers feared. Too often the Senate is still a graveyard for good ideas, and the bodies just keep piling up, especially with executive branch nominees. In January, the two leaders agreed, and I'm quoting here from what they said on the floor, to work together to schedule votes on nominees in a timely manner by unanimous consent, except in extraordinary circumstances. The minority leader said, on the subject of nominations, Senate Republicans will continue to work with the majority to process nominations consistent with the norms and traditions of the Senate. That was the agreement, and it has not been kept. The only extraordinary circumstance has been continual obstruction, and it all began very early on. For openers, we saw the filibuster of Chuck Hagel's nomination, the first time a Secretary of Defense was ever filibustered. But this is part and parcel for President Obama's cabinet secretaries. By way of comparison, looking at other presidents, not one of President Carter's cabinet nominees was filibustered. President H.W. Bush, 0. President Reagan, 1. President George W. Bush, 1. President Obama, 4, and still counting. I'm old enough to remember the era when my father was Secretary of Interior in the Kennedy administration and Johnson administrations. When I joined the Senate, I told my dad when I went home one of the weekends, we can't get executive nominees in place. The president and the cabinet secretaries don't have their teams in place. He said, Tom, I had virtually my whole team in place in the first 2 weeks. Imagine that. Imagine if the whole team for the Department of Interior, or any other department for that matter, was confirmed in the first 2 weeks. Agencies could function. Our government could do its work. Instead, the president's nominations are ambushed by filibusters. Confirmation now almost always requires 60 votes, contrary to the historical practice of the Senate. And more importantly, contrary to the explicit simple majority requirement in the U.S. Constitution. This is not the traditions and norms the Republicans committed to. It is anything but. Still, that is what we have seen. One nominee after another blocked and key leadership posts left unfilled. Americans thought they spoke with a clear voice last November. No doubt they now wonder. And why wouldn't they? The will of the majority is drowned out by a small minority. People in my home state of New Mexico want to know, Americans want to know, who is minding the store? The answer, in too many cases, is no one. We still don't have a Secretary of Labor. The National Labor Relations Board is an empty shell. The Senate has failed to confirm a full 5-member board and general counsel. 2 of these nominees are Republicans, even though they couldn't get through. This has real impact for 80 million Americans who rely on workplace protections, for the rights of workers and the integrity of the collective bargaining process. Some believe this is a good thing, that we toss out the enforcement of labor law in this country. I don't share that view. But it isn't just workers who are left hanging. Leadership positions at other vital agencies remain unfilled. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Federal Election Commission. These are important jobs, important work for the American people, affecting the environment, consumers, health care, and even our elections. Earlier this year, we debated gun safety legislation. Republicans argued that we don't need new laws, that we just need to enforce the existing laws. Unfortunately, the agency responsible for enforcing many of those laws, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, has not had a Senate-confirmed director in 7 years. Why? Because Republicans do not want the ATF to function. Many of these highly qualified Americans get tired of having their lives put on hold because of partisan obstruction. Rather than continue to languish in a dysfunctional system, they withdraw from consideration. One such example was Don Johnson, nominated to head the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel. Johnson was a respected law professor and former top assistant in the Office of Legal Counsel in the Clinton administration, but Republicans blocked her nomination. In 2010, after her nomination was stalled in the Senate over a year, she withdrew. Another example is Peter Diamond. In 2011, he withdrew as President Obama's nominee to the Federal Reserve Board. Diamond's nomination was blocked because a small minority of senators questioned whether he was qualified. I tend to believe that he was, as he won the Nobel Prize in economics the year before. It makes you wonder why anyone would subject themselves to a Senate confirmation. People who want to serve their country, often at a significant pay cut from their private sector careers, but know they will be subjected to a partisan fight that they may have nothing to do with their qualifications. So months and years go by. Work is left undone, with no one at the helm of major government agencies. And that is why the Senate is in crisis. That is why we are here today. The American people deserve better than this. We need a government that does its job. That's not possible without leadership. Congress's approval ratings remain in the cellar. Why? Because of a failure to get things done. Even things as basic as allowing the president to select his own team. Find 60 votes or find someone else or leave the position empty. This is the status quo, and it must change. It's time for us to act. It's time to restore the confirmation process. Restore it to how it has worked for over 200 years. And doing so is not breaking the rules to change the rules. They have been changed before. And it's often done by a simple majority when the minority is abusing Senate procedure. As Senator Merkley pointed out last week, it's been done at least 18 times since 1977. And contrary to the Republicans' dire warnings, making these changes has never led to the death of the Senate. In fact, the Republicans themselves made a strong argument for such changes back in 2005. They were up in arms. Why? Because 10 judicial nominations had been blocked. 10 now, mind you, 10. That number seems quaint now, but it was enough for the Republicans, and they were very clear about it. That's what the Republican Policy Committee said in 2005. I want to read to you what they said at this time. Quote, "This breakdown in Senate norms is profound. This is now a risk that the Senate is creating a new 60-vote confirmation standard. The Constitution plainly requires no more than a majority vote to confirm any executive nomination, but some senators have shown that they are determined to override this constitutional standard. Exercising the constitutional option in response to judicial filibusters would restore the Senate to its long-standing norms and practices, governing judicial nominations and guarantee a minority does not transform the fundamental nature of the Senate's advice and consent responsibility. This approach, therefore, would be both reactive and restorative. Restore the Senate to its long-standing norms and practices. It would be difficult to state the case more clearly. This just isn't about the rules. It's about the traditions and norms of the Senate and their collapse under the weight of filibusters. I know the winds can change, positions can change. Neither side is 100% pure on this. Both sides have had their moments of obstruction, and no doubt their reasons at the time. But I don't think the American people care much about that. They don't want a history lesson. They want a primer, and they don't want a primer on parliamentary procedure. They just want a government that works, that gets things done, period. I came to the Senate in 2009. My position on this has not changed since then. The Senate needs to do its job, and it's missing in action. When we proposed to change the rules at the beginning of the Congress, we were very clear. We called for a talking filibuster. If you want to hold up legislation, you should have to stand here in this chamber on the floor and make your case. We did not intend to trample on the legitimate rights of the minority, and we were willing to live with these rules no matter if we were in the majority or the minority. I do not believe the Constitution gives me the right to block a qualified nominee, no matter who is in the White House. I say that today, and I will say it if I am in the minority tomorrow. A Republican president may have nominees I disagree with, most likely so, but the people elect a president. We only have one president at a time, and they give him or her the right to select a team to govern. If those nominees are qualified, a minority in the Senate should not be able to block them on either side of the aisle. Oversight, yes. Review, yes, but not block because you don't like their policy or their program or the law they are committed to enforce. This is not advice and consent. This is obstruction and delay. New Mexicans want a government that works. The American people want a government that works, and they're tired of waiting. Thank you, Madam President.